Chapter 1 of Find the Woman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Find the Woman by Gelett Burgess. Chapter 1 Prologue, in which is explained how an architectural draftsman came to possess 3 sets of names before he was 21, and how a portrait disturbed him. Who was Belle Charmion? If you really care to know, as John Fenton did, you must go with him on his quest, hither and yon over New York, into strange houses and through side streets at midnight, a shuttle in the secret loom of fate, weaving in and out through many colored threads until the pattern of the mystery is made clear. For the warp of his strange adventurous career, love and beauty and diamonds. For the woof, some few cross currents of crime and misery. There, in brief, is the web of his drama. So if you ask for such diversion, the narrative must perforce begin with a prelude, that you may make acquaintance with the hero and see what manner of youth and temperament sped him on his way. To explain why an engineer's draftsman of no especial talent should at 21 have already had 3 sets of names, the review of his history should be divided into 5 epochs. The first, a prehistoric era, that of his babyhood, was in his memory a mere blur of confused, faded pictures, amongst which stood out one vivid, sharp recollection, a scene on a ferry boat, swept by keen, brisk winds, cool under a watery spring sun. He was playing on deck with a little yellow-haired girl under the careless supervision of 2 indefinite elders. With a small boy's insistence, he was teasing his companion, clutching at a gold heart-shaped locket with a white star which hung about her neck. She pulled away from him. The chain broke, and she ran crying to her guardian, leaving the locket in his hands. The second epoch, that of his childhood between the ages of 4 and 8, was somewhat more clear in his mind, although there were many gaps he could never account for. He was living in South Boston, and now his name was Michael O'Shea. His scarlet hair had gained for him amongst the children of his street the easy sobriquet of Reddy, and at first he had not consented to the name without many savage protests. Living with an uncle and an aunt, the O'Sheas, hard by the blind asylum, his life was a street urchin's career of conflict and roving, with intermittent enforced sessions at the primary school. He roamed from the Point to the Dover Street Bridge. He knew the docks to the last pile, from the land and from the water. He felt, too, often, the missile of an opponent gang, a snowball enclosing a rock. Of his lineage he heard only that his mother had been a mill hand in Fitchburg, and that his father had died at sea. This information, embroidered by diverse details which little by little he perceived as lies, was always told him with winks and smiles, as if concealed within their falsehoods was some consummate joke. He grew tired of questioning finally, and brooded sullenly over the puzzle of his birth. When he was 8 years old, the O'Sheas, with a shiny black valise and a paper-covered trunk, moved to New York. They took 2 rooms in a tenement on the East Side, a place of multitudinous fire escapes, waving blankets, screaming children, and dented ash barrels. But in that place Reddy O'Shea was not to stay long. The day after moving in, while Mrs. O'Shea was unpacking the trunk and Mangus O'Shea was shaving at a broken triangle of mirror stuck in the window, the boy's eyes caught a shiny something in an open cardboard box. In wonder, with a queer, sickish feeling of recognition, he stooped down and took it. A little golden heart with a star of white stones on the cover. Strange memories, as if of a long-forgotten dream, stirred him uneasily as he handled it. The next moment he was knocked down by a violent cuff on the ear, and Mangus O'Shea stood over him, his small reddish eyes blazing, ugly with anger, his snarling lips parted, revealing a broken row of little black teeth, horribly distinct in the middle of his lathered face. "Look at what you've done now!" he exclaimed to his wife. "After 4 years av hidin' and pullin' the wool over his eyes. It'll be your fault now if he begins to prick up his ears. Why didn't ye lock it up from him?" He turned to the boy and shook a great scarred, hairy fist. "If I ketch you snooping round after things again, I'll break every rib in your body, and mind ye that." He struck Reddy again viciously to enforce the warning, and returned to his shaving. No sooner had he turned his back than the boy slipped out, ran down the narrow, dirty stairs of the tenement, and was out on the street. He hurried downtown as fast as his legs would carry him. There followed 2 days of wandering, starvation, cold. He crossed the Brooklyn Bridge and lost himself in a wilderness of narrow streets with rows of dreary-looking houses. When Dr. Hopbottom found him, he was only half conscious. The third epoch, that of his adolescence, was the wretchedest of all. A household drudge, enslaved by Mrs. Hopbottom for domestic assistance, washing dishes, sweeping, cooking, 100 other degradingly feminine tasks which went even to sewing and darning the doctor's woolen socks. Joe Hopbottom, as he was now called, almost forgot that he was a boy. He lived in squalor, gnawing scraps in the kitchen, scolded by Mrs. Hopbottom continually, and continually preached at by the doctor, a hoary old hypocrite, whose face Joe loathed. The doctor's favorite occupation was to lecture the boy on the simple life. "Plain living and high thinking, Joe," he would say, his cheeks bulging with mince pie or suet pudding. "Don't make your belly your god," as he shoveled in loaded knifelfuls of hot pork. The doctor's face was greasy with exuding fat. His hands were pudgy. "Manners make the man, Joe, not clothes," he often said to his miserable, ragged ward, as he strung a heavy gold watch chain across his embroidered waistcoat. "I think that suit of yours will do another year, with a little brushing." And so it went. The doctor did not drink or swear. He had all the virtues of the Pharisees, including a goat's beard, but for every worldly vice he had an efficient substitute. Instead of alcohol, he used coffee with an equally stimulating effect, injecting it under his skin till he was as yellow as a Moor. In the place of profanity, he made use of highly original but perfectly adequate diction composed of scientific terms. To poor, terrified Joe, this jargon seemed worse than any oaths sanctified by custom. "You toxoleucocyte," he would exclaim to the boy, "what do you want to make a phenyltribromopropionic hypotenuse of yourself for?" To such mysterious apostrophes Joe could make no answer. Only once did he see Mangus O'Shea. That was when he went to New York with the doctor to attend the meeting of a committee investigating the white slave traffic. They were walking up the Bowery, the doctor absorbed in the theatrical posters, when the Irishman passed them. He stopped and stared. Joe, turning around fearfully to see if he had been observed, caught O'Shea's eager red eyes upon him. He clung to the doctor's hands and urged him forward. Dr. Hopbottom reluctantly resumed his journey. At the next stand, bearing the picture of Pulchritude's Peacherino Burlesquers, the boy turned round and saw that O'Shea had followed. At Canal Street he was lost in the crowd. Joe dreamed of him for 7 nights running, but then a new interest diverted his thoughts. Rummaging in the dusty attic one day, while Mrs. Hopbottom was at her sewing circle, Joe discovered some old numbers of the Studio left by a lodger, and between his washings and his darnings he pored over wonderful photographs of paintings and sculpture, hiding the book under the eaves when he went back to work. At night, when he had a few moments to himself, he copied the pictures with pencil, patiently, lovingly, abominably. The Hopbottoms did, at least, permit him an education, and he had almost finished his course at the high school before the crash came. The Studio, and a boy in his own class, brought on the crisis. His friend was a member of a private life class which rented a studio on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, hired an inexpressibly ugly model, and drew therefrom in charcoal. The class was composed mainly of architects, ambitious draftsmen, and with his friend's influence Joe was permitted to join. Finding money for paper and charcoal and board seemed at first impossible, but the sale of old rags and bottles filched from the Hopbottom's cellar at last sufficed for the purchase of his material, and the men allowed him to attend for a while, gratis. The boy was already a personable, good-natured youth, and soon became popular. His explanation of his absence was that he was attending a Bible class at the Y.M.C.A. His industry was great, if not his talent. By the time he was 16 years old, a fat roll of terrible studies from the nude was hidden away in the attic. Joe had become so enthusiastic in the pursuit of art that he had almost forgotten the chaste point of view of the Philistines. Dr. Hopbottom still preached asceticism for others, gesticulating with his pie, and still his fat increased. Still he preached the simple life, the renunciation of the flesh, the temptation of the senses. One night Joe and his friend left a vaudeville theater in shocked disgust at the row of vulgar, half-clad females who were performing a suggestive burlesque. As he went out, he saw Dr. Hopbottom's unctuous, grinning face in the audience, his eyes devouring the charms of the actresses. It was the next morning the explosion came. Mrs. Hopbottom, climbing upstairs for a spring cleaning, discovered Joe's charcoal studies from the nude. There was a hysterical tumult, lightnings of her flashing eye, thunder of her expostulation, a storm of tattered charcoal drawings. Joe put his head through the doorway to find the cause of her temper. With his ear in one hand and the sole survivor of his sketches as a sample of sin in her other, the lady stalked into the doctor's study. His wrath was sublime. Moral precepts, sermonettes, warnings, prayers, reproaches, quotations from the Bible. Timothy 4:12, Leviticus 26:27 to 29. He invoked pictures of future torment, and made a closer inspection of the drawing. He put it away carefully in his desk, waving his wife's itching fingers aside, and invoked heaven, raising his eyebrows. Joe could stand it no longer, told pithily of the previous evening's vaudeville horrors. It was prayer-meeting night, then left the doctor and his blazing spouse to fight it out together. He packed a few clothes with deliberation, and walked calmly, happily, back across the Brooklyn Bridge. He was free. A great peace was in his soul. Halfway across, he wafted a gorgeous resolution forth upon the breeze. The loathly name of Hopbottom sailed from his body, never to return. Stealing a new one from the first theatrical billboard he passed, he entered New York as John Fenton. So began his youth. We may pass lightly over the next 5 years of his life. He had been trained to take hard knocks. He had industry and a savor of humor. He made his way. Some of his draftsman friends busied themselves for him, and he soon found a position as an office boy for a firm of architects. Between his petty duties he practiced lettering, copied the orders, made blueprints and tracings. What he lacked in genius he made up in determination, and at the age of 21 he earned $18 a week, and by frugality and a cheap Harlem lodging house saved the half of it. The red of his hair had toned to a deep auburn. Gymnasium work, long walks, and simple living had improved his looks till many a girl's eyes gave him a second glance as he passed. He had, even in his obscurity, the habits of a gentleman, and a way of wearing his ready-made clothes that took off the curse of cheapness. His landlady was wont to gossip over his charms and his aristocratic manners. She let many a room on the strength of them. Once, 5 or 6 years after he had escaped from Brooklyn, he came upon Dr. Hopbottom in a penny arcade. The doctor was looking into a moving picture machine bearing the legend, "The Story of an Artist's Model." He was turning the crank slowly, very slowly. Something arrested his attention. He looked up with a guilty face. "Good morning," said John affably, wondering why he had ever feared this senile old fool. "You correlated dimorphic appendix, you! What are you doing? Some blastodermic corollarious mischief, I suppose." The doctor tried to look dignified. "Oh, I'm going in for architecture. I see you're at your old game, though," said John, and giving him a withering smile, passed on. And so at last we come to the picture which inaugurated John Fenton's 5th epoch. Lucky for men that all have not the same tastes. Lucky for men that each chooses his own type of beauty. Lucky that no one woman can please all men, else every woman might be a Helen of Troy, and war would rage amongst men over her everlastingly. Unlucky for Melton's magazine, however, that there were not more John Fentons to mob the newsstands and buy up a certain edition of that periodical. Comparatively few men, perhaps, would call the girl's face pretty. Most, at least, would turn the page with small regret. But to John Fenton the sight of that face was the starting of many emotions. In that glance he achieved maturity. His youth ended on page 212. Manhood began at page 213. He came across the magazine in a friend's studio, and not daring to confess how much the picture affected him, he sought a chance, cut out the page, and concealed it under his coat. It showed the face of a girl of perhaps 20 years, with soft parted hair rolling away from her forehead, eyes wide apart under level brows, and a smiling mouth at once demure and whimsical. So much for the outward aspect. Beauty, however, is subjective. In John Fenton's mind something responded, as to a message, the secret call of a subconscious desire, potent as a magic charm. To win that girl he would have plowed across Arctic snows, fought his way through tropical jungles, chanced peril, war, or pestilence. So much he resolved at first glance. When he got the page safely home he smoothed out its wrinkles and studied it, perturbed and trembling. By a sorry trick of chance, someone, cutting a paragraph from the opposite side of the page, had deleted the name of the girl. Not till he had had the portrait on his wall for a week, not till a new element had begun to creep into its attraction for him, did he realize that he had been a fool not to look at the magazine and see its name and date, that he might procure an undisfigured copy. It was now impossible to trace it, and the girl must remain unnamed. As he studied it day by day, its charm grew more potent. Something more than the girl's mere physical attraction moved him. The romance and mystery of the face became more and more magnetic. At first vague and troublesome, it at last absorbed him. It seemed to promise some hidden meaning for him alone. The talk of a theosophical fellow worker at his office began to simmer in his brain. Had he perchance known this girl in some previous life? Were their destinies linked? Had they made karma together? In such wise he mused. At times the strain on his imagination grew so tense that he would put the picture away and busy himself with prosaic projects, some competition for courthouse or pergola. But the lady did not long hide her face. Back she came to his wall again, now as expensively framed as a dry point Halleux etching, and again John Fenton's thoughts roved on the wings of romance. End of chapter 1.